November 30th, 1941, 20 miles west of Moscow. The temperature has fallen to minus 30 degrees Celsius. Engines cough like dying animals. Somewhere in the darkness, a panzer crewman slams his fists against frozen steel, trying to coax warmth into metal that no longer remembers heat. The oil in the engine sump has turned to sludge. The grease in the turret ring is solid. Nothing moves unless it is beaten into submission. Above them, the sky is perfectly clear. Stars burn sharp and merciless, the kind of clarity that only comes when the air itself is frozen. General Heinz Guderian stands outside his command vehicle, collar pulled high, breath crystallizing instantly. He does not write tonight. Ink freezes in the pen. The paper cracks when folded. Orders must be memorized, shouted, or not given at all. This is the night the German advance toward Moscow stops pretending it is still in control. You can almost feel the cold creeping in, not as weather, but as an enemy, silent, methodical, unstoppable. The German army did not plan for this. That sentence, simple as it is, will echo through the private diaries and post-war interrogations of Hitler's generals like a confession whispered too late. In late November 1941, the Wehrmacht was exhausted but still advancing. Operation Barbarossa, launched 5 months earlier, was supposed to end before winter. 6 weeks, Hitler promised, 10 at most. The Red Army would collapse. Moscow would fall. The war in the East would be finished before the leaves fell. Instead, the leaves are gone, and so is the illusion of control. Inside Army Group Center's headquarters, General Franz Halder pores over situation maps with numb fingers. The blue and red arrows no longer advance with confidence. They stutter, hesitate, stop. Reports arrive late, if they arrive at all. Radios fail. Batteries die within minutes. Field telephones snap when moved. Halder writes later that the cold paralyzed everything. But on this night, there is no word for it yet, only sensation. Cold so intense that sentries must be rotated every 15 minutes to prevent collapse. Cold that splits rifle stocks. A cold that freezes eyelids together if a man sleeps too long without blinking. And still, the orders stand. Advance. Further south, near Tula, General Guderian's 2nd Panzer Army is grinding itself into the frozen earth. His tanks, once the symbol of German invincibility, are becoming static bunkers. Crews light fires beneath engine blocks, burning anything they can find, crates, fence posts, sometimes even ammunition boxes. One spark too many, and a tank goes up in flames. Guderian argues. He always argues. He radios higher command, warning that his units are breaking down faster than the Soviets, that machines are failing, that men are collapsing from frostbite before they ever see the enemy. The response comes back from Berlin, filtered through layers of command and ideology.
The Russian winter is exaggerated. The enemy is on the brink of collapse. Hold your nerve. Guderian later recalls standing in the snow, listening to that message crackle through a frozen radio and realizing something fundamental had shifted. Not tactically, not operationally, psychologically. Because the enemy he is fighting now is not just the Red Army. It is time. It is a distance. It is cold. And cold does not retreat. Across the front, German generals begin to notice something unsettling. The Soviets are changing. They do not retreat as often. When they do, they come back, harder, faster, better equipped for the night. Their troops wear padded jackets and fur-lined boots. Their rifles fire, their tanks start. German soldiers watch Red Army infantry ski silently through forests that the Germans cannot even enter. Soviet T-34s emerge from snowdrifts like predators, engines roaring to life, while German crews are still hammering ice from fuel lines. General Erich von Manstein, commanding in the south, will later describe the winter as a force multiplier for the Soviets. But in November 1941, he simply knew this: the rules of the campaign have changed, and no one has told Berlin. Manstein's staff officers bring him casualty reports. Frostbite cases outnumber combat wounds. Entire battalions are combat ineffective without ever having fired a shot. To lose a man to the enemy is one thing. To lose him to the cold, silently, uselessly, is something else entirely. It drains morale in ways artillery never could. In Moscow, the Kremlin watches the temperature drop with quiet satisfaction. Stalin has been told repeatedly that winter is Russia's ally. He does not fully believe in allies, human or otherwise, but he understands geography and climate and suffering. He releases fresh Siberian divisions into the line, troops hardened in -40 degrees, trained for exactly this moment. They arrive wearing white camouflage, moving at night, striking where German units are weakest. The Germans feel it immediately. General Halder notes in his diary that Soviet attacks now come with a confidence previously unseen, confidence born not of numbers but of environment. The cold has chosen sides, and it has not chosen Germany. Back at the front, the sensory assault is relentless. Metal screams when struck. Snow crunches loud enough to betray movement. Beards freeze solid, pulling painfully at the skin. Men sleep sitting up, afraid that lying down means not waking up.
Food freezes. Bread must be chopped with axes. Meat is gnawed like wood. Water is melted from snow, then immediately freezes again. And always the wind. It cuts through wool uniforms designed for a European autumn, not a Russian winter. Greatcoats stiffen into armor, fingers blacken. To remove a glove is to risk losing the hand. German commanders walk the line, trying to project confidence they do not feel. They cannot admit the truth yet. The campaign has outrun its assumptions. Hitler, far away, issues directives that grow more rigid by the day. No retreat, no withdrawal, hold every position. To his generals, these orders feel less like strategy and more like denial. Guderian will later write that Hitler had no understanding of the realities at the front. But in November 1941, he still hopes reason might prevail. He requests permission to pull back to defensible winter positions. The answer is no. So the men dig in, sometimes literally into frozen ground that cannot be penetrated without explosives. Foxholes become shallow scrapes. Bodies pile in trenches not deep enough to hide them. Every day, the temperature drops further. Every night, the Red Army probes. There is a moment, several generals will later describe it independently, when they realize something irreversible has occurred. Not defeat, not yet, but momentum. The German army has stopped dictating events. It is reacting, surviving, enduring. And endurance was never the plan. The Wehrmacht was built for movement, for speed, for decisive blows. Now it is static, brittle, stretched across hundreds of miles of hostile terrain. General Halder writes that the army is living from hand to mouth. Supply columns cannot move, trucks freeze, horses die standing up. Ammunition arrives late, if at all. Meanwhile, Soviet artillery begins to fire with renewed intensity, shells arcing through the frozen air like punctuation marks on the end of a sentence the Germans did not know they were writing. The freezing Russian winter is no longer a backdrop. It is the commander now, and it is issuing orders no German general can countermand. As November bleeds into December, the cold tightens its grip, and with it comes a realization that will haunt Hitler's generals for the rest of their lives. The war in the East will not end quickly. It will not end cleanly, and it will not end on Germany's terms. But the worst is still to come. Because just as the Germans brace themselves for survival, the Red Army is preparing something else entirely. An answer. December 5th, 1941, 0630 hours. Kalinin Front, northwest of Moscow. The snow explodes upward in dark fountains as Soviet artillery opens fire.
For a split second, German soldiers think it is another harassing barrage, noise without consequence. Then the ground starts to shake. Trees splinter, telephone poles snap like matchsticks. The shelling does not lift. It intensifies. This is not harassment. This is the beginning of a counteroffensive. General Georgy Zhukov has waited for this moment with ruthless patience. He has watched the German spearheads grind themselves thin, watched frostbite rot combat strength faster than bullets, watched entire divisions slow to a crawl. Now, with the temperature hovering near -35, he gives the order. Advance. Soviet ski troops surge forward through forests that the Germans believed were impassable. Fresh rifle divisions, pulled from Siberia and the Far East, slam into exhausted German units whose men have not slept properly in weeks. T-34 tanks roll straight through snowdrifts that would immobilize panzers, engines roaring, tracks gripping frozen ground like claws. For the first time since June, the Germans are not attacking. They are being hunted. At Army Group Center headquarters, the reports arrive in rapid succession. Enemy breakthrough near Klin, heavy pressure north of Kaluga, units falling back without orders. General Franz Halder reads them with a growing sense of dread. This is not a local setback. This is coordinated, strategic, deliberate. A winter offensive, one that the German High Command insisted was impossible. Halder later admits that December 5th marked a psychological rupture. The belief that the Red Army was finished, exhausted, incompetent, brittle, dies that morning. What replaces it is something far more dangerous: respect and fear. Out in the line, German commanders scramble to respond, but response requires mobility, and mobility has frozen solid. Guderian's 2nd Panzer Army is hit hard. Soviet infantry infiltrates between positions at night, cutting supply routes already stretched to breaking. Tanks that finally start after hours of effort are destroyed by anti-tank guns hidden beneath the snow. Guderian orders limited withdrawals to avoid encirclement. He knows what happens if his units are surrounded in this cold. They do not break out. They disappear. But withdrawals require permission, and permission does not come. Hitler's reaction is immediate and catastrophic. On December 8th, he issued a directive forbidding any retreat without explicit authorization. Commanders are ordered to hold their ground fanatically. Positions are to be defended to the last man. The logic from Berlin is ideological. The belief that willpower can overcome physics, that resolve can replace fuel, that loyalty can substitute for winter clothing. At the front, the effect is brutal. German units are pinned in exposed positions that they cannot defend and cannot abandon. Frostbite turns into gangrene. Ammunition runs low. Men freeze in place during night watches, found rigid at dawn, rifles still in their hands. General von Manstein, fighting desperately in the south, later writes that Hitler's order turned setbacks into disasters. But in December 1941, disobedience is unthinkable. So they hold, and they die. The cold magnifies everything. Wounds that might have been survivable become fatal. Evacuation is nearly impossible. Stretchers freeze to the ground. Blood crystallizes before it can be wiped away. Doctors amputate fingers and toes with numb hands. Morphine freezes. Bandages stiffen. The smell of frostbitten flesh hangs over aid stations like a curse. German officers begin to notice something else, something harder to quantify. Their men are no longer confident. The aura of invincibility that carried them from the Bug River to the gates of Moscow has shattered. Soldiers whisper that the Russians cannot be beaten in winter, that the land itself rejects them. Superstition creeps in where certainty once lived. Meanwhile, Soviet morale surges. Red Army troops advance into abandoned German positions and find crates of summer uniforms, oil unsuitable for cold weather, and weapons jammed solid with ice. Proof, tangible and undeniable, that the enemy never planned to be here this long. Zhukov presses harder. He knows the Germans are brittle, that every mile they're forced back shortens supply lines and strengthens Soviet logistics. He does not seek annihilation yet. He seeks momentum, and he has it. In mid-December, Guderian finally acts. Without authorization, he orders a withdrawal to prevent total collapse. It is a calculated risk. Save the army now, argue later. Hitler is furious. On December 26th, Heinz Guderian, architect of Blitzkrieg, symbol of German armored warfare, is relieved of command. The message to every other general is unmistakable: obey or be removed, even if obedience means destruction. By Christmas 1941, the German army was no longer advancing anywhere on the Eastern Front.
It is bleeding, freezing, digging in for survival. General Halder writes that the situation is the gravest crisis of the war so far. He is not exaggerating. The Wehrmacht has suffered hundreds of thousands of casualties since June. Entire divisions are shadows of their former strength. And winter has only just begun. The generals understand now that Moscow will not fall in 1941. Perhaps not ever. But what they do not yet fully grasp, what will become clear only in the months ahead, is that the freezing Russian winter has done something even more profound. It has exposed the limits of Hitler's leadership. And once those limits are visible, they cannot be unseen. January 18, 1942. Wolfschanze, East Prussia, early evening. Outside Hitler's headquarters, snow lies undisturbed beneath pine trees, pristine and silent. Inside, the atmosphere is anything but. Maps cover the walls, once filled with bold arrows racing east, now cluttered with defensive lines drawn backward again and again. The red pins no longer look temporary, they look permanent. Hitler paces. His limp is more pronounced now, his voice sharper. He speaks of willpower, of destiny, of Frederick the Great. He does not speak of temperature. The generals do not interrupt. They have learned. By January 1942, the freezing Russian winter had completed its work. The German army has not been destroyed, but it has been fundamentally changed. What began as a campaign of annihilation has become a war of survival. And in private, away from Hitler's gaze, his generals begin to speak with startling honesty. Not in public, not yet, but in diaries, in letters, in post-war interrogations, where the cold no longer threatens their fingers, only their legacy. General Franz Halder writes that winter fighting revealed a complete miscalculation of enemy resilience and environmental realities. It is as close as the former chief of the General Staff ever comes to admitting strategic blindness. He notes that the German army was not merely unprepared for winter, it was psychologically unprepared for a war that did not end quickly. Speed was their religion. Winter turned speed into liability. General Erich von Manstein, more measured, more surgical in his words, later concludes that climate did not defeat Germany alone, but it exposed fatal flaws in leadership. An army that cannot adapt, he writes, is already defeated. And adaptation was impossible when every decision flowed from one man. Hitler's refusal to authorize flexible defense becomes the central theme of the generals' reckoning. Again and again, they describe the same pattern. Local commanders recognize danger. They request withdrawal. Berlin refuses. Units are destroyed.
The winter amplifies every delay. General Gotthard Heinrici, one of the Wehrmacht's best defensive commanders, later explains that cold weather warfare demands elasticity. Give ground, preserve men, trade space for time. Hitler does the opposite. He trades men for ideology. The freezing conditions force the generals into a bitter realization. They are no longer trusted as professionals. Hitler micromanages down to the battalion level, issuing orders blind to terrain, weather, and logistics.
Generals become messengers, not decision-makers. Strategy becomes obedience. The winter does not just freeze engines, it freezes initiative. At the front, the consequences are written in bodies. German soldiers retreat when they can, surrender when they must, die where they stand when they cannot do either. Entire regiments vanish in snowstorms, supply depots are overrun, horses, once the backbone of German logistics, collapse by the tens of thousands. The Wehrmacht adapts eventually, winter uniforms are issued, cold weather lubricants distributed, and defensive doctrines revised. But it is too late to undo what winter 1941-42 has already accomplished. The myth is broken. The Red Army knows it. Soviet propaganda seizes on the moment, portraying German soldiers as invaders undone by Mother Russia herself. But behind the slogans is something real: confidence. Not reckless optimism, but belief earned through survival. Zhukov later writes that the winter counteroffensive proved the Red Army could defeat the Germans operationally, not just endure them. That knowledge changes everything. When spring finally arrives, it does not bring relief. It brings mud. The Rasputitsa swallows vehicles whole. Roads vanish, corpses thaw and rot where they fell months earlier. The stench lingers like a reminder. German officers walk battlefields and see frozen poses of death slowly relax into collapse. Men who died mid-step, mid-command, mid-prayer. This is what the winter leaves behind. After the war, when interrogated by Allied officers, German generals spoke more freely. They talk about arrogance, about underestimating the Soviet Union, about believing their own propaganda. But when asked what truly changed the war, many return to the same memory: the cold, not as an excuse, but as a verdict. The Russian winter did not invent Germany's failures, it revealed them. It stripped away speed, surprise, and momentum until only leadership remained. And leadership failed. One former staff officer puts it simply: in Russia, winter asked questions, and the answers were not good. By the time the ice released its grip, the Eastern Front had already been transformed. What had been a campaign of conquest became a war of attrition that Germany could never win. From that winter onward, every German offensive would carry its shadow. Every general would remember what -30 felt like, and every soldier would know the land itself was against them.